Can you read what it is here?
Yeah.
The Vice Chancellor of Godfrey University,
Wait, can you
Very Reverend Friar Professor Christian.
wait? Are you seeing me the
Father.
information there? You
No,
can
I've
read
not
it.
read it before. I was just
Have a
saying
sharp eyesight.
is in a pose with Honorable Justice Dr. C.C. Nweze, GSC, during the official naming
I
of
read.
the property of the
I read.
Court in honor of the Honorable
Read.
Justice Nweze on Monday, 21st, 2020.
All right, Prime Minister.
Okay.
You can start your speech.
Right, thank you. Am I audible if I speak like this?
Yep.
Okay. So, disclaimer, I have dehydration issues. So if I start cracking, just give me water. And I'll take points of clarification at my second minute. But if you have QIs for my arguments, keep it at the 5th minute. This time as I'm speaking. Thank you. I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel. This house hopes that the universe of the Undying exists. First things first, what does the universe of Undying look like? Do you know this is where individuals go when they die, and their subconsciousness and memories get to be reborn in other subconscious beings, and they still get to live a second life in some way, in the world where you could describe as an afterlife after death. We think that within this debate, the concept of hope should be framed in a simplistic manner to avoid all doubt and all confusion. So what do we think hope means in this particular debate in terms of frame? So the concept of hope is in this debate is simply one that presents itself as an aspiration and desire for this universe. Because of the fact that we could justify, or we are demanded to justify, that this universe can bring some level of benefit to humanity, and because of those benefits, we hope that this universe does exist because it becomes essential at the end of the day. Why is this clarification important? This clarification is important because, for example, if we say we hope in Africa that human beings or women in that particular regard stop being subjugated under patriarchy and patriarchal traditions and other things that lead them oppressed, it means that we hope one day those structures of itself will not exist and those women get to be free. Secondly, if we say that we hope that women within the Middle East of itself and live in a world where they no longer are oppressed under Islamic regimes and all those things, it means that we aspire to a world where it is possible for those women to be living free outside those particular regimes in that particular land. It means why this clarification is important is because of two particular reasons. The first reason is that there is no burden on OG in this debate to create the extreme narrative of an expectation that one day that particular universe will exist, and secondly, there is no burden in this debate that mandates OG to clearly give some practical presentation as to structure what this universe will look like. The essential thing to do here is to justify if there are some things that essentially comes out of this universe, and if it is principally justified for us to actually hope that this universe exists in that particular regard, and if so, what do we attempt to achieve? Yes, you are.
If you hope that it exists, you have to create that universe in your head. Not really. Create it in your head as well.
If it was possible, then CAP should have also created it in their head. That's not how debate works. Please ask me reasonable POI. Moving on, first argumentation. First argumentation on why we hope that this universe exists, because then again, I already created a clarity here. The aspiration and desire for this universe to exist, why we hope for it to exist, because we believe that we can justify that there are some essential benefits that comes out of it. So therefore, it should exist for us to derive those benefits for human beings and the entire society. I don't get where CEO's POI is coming from. Moving on, first argumentation. We hope that this universe exists because of the fact that we think that it primarily answers the human curiosity and anxiety as related to things like the afterlife. Why is this particularly important? The questions of importance around the afterlife in itself create individuals into perils that they find themselves into certain institutions and structures where they are highly subjugated under certain ideologies and theologies that they cannot control. Such ideologies like religion, culture, and traditions of itself that subjugate individuals of itself to limit the practical ability of their own individual capacity to live and self-actualize, because you need to be a good Christian so you can go to heaven and not hell, because you need to be a good Muslim so you can go to Jahannam and not be punished by Allah at the end of the day. This curiosity of itself has tried to be answered by scientific discoveries, but because of the fact that we hope that this universe exists, it further broadens that knowledge base in that particular regard. Secondly, within that this universe of itself, we hope that it exists for the second layer of analysis. Death and loss of individual well-being, and death and loss of individuals, like our relations and all those things, have always been very problematic for individuals to conquer. If there's one thing that we're not been able to scientifically and technologically advance towards, is how to stop human beings from dying from things like climate change or extreme circumstances like war. In the world where we believe that this universe exists, That is the world where we create a second parameter as to where human beings have a chance to overcome death and still ensure the utility can be gotten from productive members of the society. Why is this essentially important? This universe creates a second parameter where individuals can exist within their self-consciousness, remain their skills and abilities in that particular regard to still be impactful in the society, and even in certain instances be given a second chance at life. This is extremely important because human technological advances or even creating abstract world is for the sole purpose of actualizing and ensuring for human preservation in that particular regard. I've not entered my 5th minute, I'm at the 3rd minute. Hold on. Then the second layer in of itself is as to why we need to remove the subjugation in that particular regard. Within a subjugation of individuals to specific ideologies harm three things. Firstly, the ability of individuals to question certain theologies that exist within status quo and actually justify it with realistic tendencies. In a world where we believe that this universe exists, individuals now have a second abstraction as to how they could justify what will happen to them in the afterlife and how to actually plan and live their life better. Secondly, knowledge-based interactions and discussions become better for average human beings in that particular regard, and an expansion of knowledge-based is essential because this new universe creates opportunities that human beings can take advantage of because of the necessary resources that actually exist within there. And then lastly, within that, such knowledge of itself is essential because it actually needs some level of expansion as to the gravity, as to the to lead to some level of expansion in terms of the human mind in and of itself and its capacities even after death. That way, we conquer limitation, we create a new trajectory for progress, and we create human beings at the most having and leveling ground in that particular regard. Within that, secondly, within that, this universe is also important because it addresses the issues of inequalities and promotes second chances. We think that the society we live in, there are lots of things that are wrong with it. Individuals don't have access to a lot of things. Individuals who are cheated things like lottery or birth to be born in poor homes when you decide to be in a comfortable and more progressive society. Individuals who are born countries that are existing in wars, etc. We know that when these people die, the human race of itself justifiably has failed them because it has failed to produce a more sustainable environment for them. This universe gives us the chance to actually fulfill that burden and that principle on a more robust scale and actually give the highest level of maximum utility to those particular persons. Because, yeah.
The motion says that they are brought back to life, not that they are transmitted to an afterlife. Why does your framework say that you are answering around them?
Panel. The motion says that these individuals are brought back to life and still get to give a second life and strategy through their memories and of itself. The explanation in of itself, I don't understand why you're trying to work. The first argumentation is to show up the individuals of itself, the extent of curiosity, anxiety towards afterlife is get to be resolved because we clearly get to see what that means within this particular universe. Secondly, the concept that surgical subjugators get to be reduced and these individuals get to be protected in terms of the necessary ideologies that are fixated on them. And then lastly, panel, on how in of itself this promotes second life for individuals that have been subjugated under certain structures and institutions that the society failed to fix in of its particular regard. Now, this is primarily important because when individuals of itself get to live in this particular universe, right? This particular universe, this second chance after dying, and then you're regretted, and your memories and all those things are intact. Is that in this particular universe, there are certain opportunities and chances that could be given to this person with the memories that they have and the limitations that they have perceived. They could get to actually expand themselves and progress themselves much better in a world where in the world where we can actually justify that just some level of sustainability in that particular society. Then, in conclusion, what did opening government bring to you? The concept of hoping of itself is what we define at the point where we desire and aspire that something of itself exists because we think that it is going to be beneficial at the long run. At the point where we link it to how it actually affects those individuals that we presume is going to be beneficial to, at the point where we actually tie it to certain problematic ideology in the society and how it's going to help cure it or take it away, we think that opening government has sufficiently proven to in this particular debate that sustainably this particular union should be hoped to exist and this particular union exists and actually bring some level of benefit. Very proud to propose.
Right, this house excuses to Prime Minister. We invite the leader of opposition.
Shit.
If you have a POI, just raise your hand. I'm going to take at least one. Right. Okay. So I'm going to speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the reason why the POI for Chinedu was very important is that if they created that world, they wouldn't make the mistakes of the characterization they just did in their speech. Because we need to know clearly what that world looks like. And I think the info slide is very clear on this. It's like a advanced form of technology where biological implants exist, meaning that if you die today, you are still on Earth. You are able to extract your consciousness and put it in a new body. You are still on Earth. That is the characterization of it, because you're coming back to life. It does not say it is an afterlife that maybe people are die and then they go to a form of heaven or whatever where they are reborn. That is not just debate, right? And that is why their characterization and framework does not work. And it's also the reason why I cannot respond to a lot of things that they say, because the whole thing about answer is going to give you like an answer to like the afterlife and all. If this their world exists, that question never comes up in the first place, because nobody is fucking dying. Everybody kind of lives forever. So the simple characterization of this debate is that people become immortal. Let's then go to 5 reasons why we think that that world shouldn't exist in our world, right? So first thing, right, we think about the value of life, right, and how their world reduces the value of life, because we think that the reason why people value life is because of death, right? Because you know that you have a short time to exist. That's why people say life is short. You know that you're probably, like as a Nigerian now, you know that the life expectancy of a Nigerian is 54 years old. So you have 54 years old to do everything you want to do in this life. We think people are going to be able to maximize their effort and maximize the enjoyment they have out of life on their side, our side of the world, where people know that they die. The problem when you is that when you live for 1,000 or 2,000 years or more, you don't get that particular perspective on life, meaning that there's no incentive for you to want to be able to maximize the way that you live. Just raise your hand. It's just to maximize the way that you live, therefore not getting the best utility of life, right? You think that that's particularly problematic. So the reason why these arguments become important is that the little joys of life, of knowing that I'm going to probably create one family and enjoy the aspect of that one family, you take it away from this world where you're able to create 10,000 million family, because at the end of the day, when anything becomes infinity, this means that you're less likely going to enjoy and maximize the opportunities you get from that, right? But secondly, I'm going to talk about how their world creates inequality and like it's against anything with social justice, right? Because we think that the greatest equalizer that exists in the world is death. That is why they say that, oh, you know, people are saying that, oh, at the end of the day, even if you like accrue all the wealth in the world, we are all going to end up 6 feet under, because that is the greatest equalizer the common man has with the elite. This becomes problematic on their end because the greatest empires that have existed in humanity have cut off by death. So people like, for example, in Nigeria, Abiola, right, Bacha, that they ended up dying, and those empires were literally destroyed, right? Or even structural empires, right, that people had to fight against, like wars happened, bloody wars for people to get freedom. You don't get that kind of thing on their side of the world where these people get to live forever, right? Because it means that you're going to get a larger concentration of power in the elite. So if you're powerful right now, you're going to be fucking powerful forever because you're never able going to die, right? So even if at the end of the day, like if you continually being reborn and stuff like that, we think like wealth inequality increases, all those things. We don't think that you're able to spread wealth or spread any kind of power on their world. We think that that is what is problematic. What's your POI?
I think already engaged my argument. This is one thing. You can equally argue on the maximization of those happiness is much better. Don't use people that much who don't get the opportunity. You need equal society. What is your best?
Okay, right. The problem is that right now, the way it exists, right? If you're poor, the ability for you to be able to take down structural and elite empire is one that maximally reduces, right? So that's why they say the poor keeps getting poorer. In their world, this doesn't happen because at least the way very poor, the poor is able to like backlash against the elite, is being able to like protest against them, right? They take down powerful empires. That's why I gave you examples of wars that happen to bring down great empires. You don't side of the world where these elite people keep living forever on their side. One thing I'm going to talk about is no social change and no innovation on their end, right? We think that generations have gotten better because of the fact that people die. The problem is that people are stuck in their ways. When you've even lived for 50 years, you're basically stuck in your ways and you're less likely going to change things. This is why the older generation now don't get used to things like technology, because people get stuck in their ways. The reason why this becomes extremely problematic is that you make it difficult for people to adapt, but also we think that you're never able going to get social change, meaning that if the undying world existed in the olden days where slavery was legal, are still going to be living, are still going to have that ideology. We think that is problematic on their side of the world, especially the analysis of how this book already has like concentrated power, meaning that the concentrated issues that you have with like minorities and social change are going to exist on their end. We think that that is problematic. But panel, even if you don't buy all these arguments, right? The last argument I think you should buy is that if you live long enough, you're going to fucking hate your life. This seems like a very commonsensical thing, but I think it's extremely important in this debate, right? Because that's why if you ask the average person, the person said, "Oh, I want to live to 100," right? If you live for 1,000, 2,000 years, we think that you're just going to get fucking tired of life, and then nobody is going to be fucking happy, right? This is why if you stay in one place for a long time, you're going to want change. If you keep eating one food for weeks, you're going to fucking hate the food. It's just normal human psychology, right? We think that you should not take out the joys of that people get when you're able to like die. We think that death isn't a bad thing, because at the end of the day, living for thousands of years remove any utility, removes any enjoyment you're able to get out of life. Panel, we think people should die. That's not a bad thing. Let's embrace it.
All right. We excuse the leader of opposition for that. Please would like to welcome the DPM. Yeah. Okay. Is it cool? Okay. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to start in three. Eh? I should reduce it. Oh, can I be heard? Can I be heard? I'm ready. I'm going to start in three, two, one. Chair, there is an important clarification you get from Grace's speech. So that's why it's very confusing when Ayafa and Peace tries to twist it to the whole P that like what we are trying to do on our own end is to frame it as afterlife. The info slide already clearly says that this is like sort of like counter to like also like looks like immortality, right? What it means in our world or what our argument does is that it answers the question as to what afterlife looks like, not that it proposes the word of afterlife or pushes another like alternative or what afterlife is going to look like. The reason why that argument is important is that in the impact, you get how it frees individuals from subjugation to things like religion. But secondly, it's more able to encompass a large number of individuals, given that not everybody is able to buy into things like religion. So it means that you accommodate more people under that wing to the extent where they're able like to hope for the existence of this machine. But secondly, I think it's confusing when peace tries to argue things that, oh, that we think that this argue or we think that this machine is something that harms innovation. First, again, the info slide clearly says that at the moment of dying, that brain activity is still active, meaning that all those innovative ideas are still retained and can be brought back when these niggas are switched back to life. So I don't get the mechanization as to how you harm innovation, given that these activities that necessarily, or the brain activity that necessitated the ideas of those innovations they try to say is harm, still exists in their brain to be brought back into a new body. But another thing they argue is as to value of life. They claim that life doesn't have value in a place where people are immortal. The problem with the argument is that she fails to acknowledge the equality that exists in that argument, even that death in and of itself takes away the level of self-actualization that individuals ordinarily want to have. Why? Because we think that still like things like individuals stuff in the society eventually gets taken away by death. What our world does is that will probably give these individuals another avenue to like come back to like implement these ideas in another embedded body. Why is this important? The reason why this is important is that people that have necessarily not gone through the process of this machine still get to gain from those like net benefits of those ideas and all of those type of stuff. But secondly, it's still mean that their brainchild like still like self-actualizes, and that is something that will rather claim, rather in a world where they don't even get accolades for it at all because death takes them away. And argue is that death is an equalizer, so you necessarily take away that level of that level of equalizer when you do things like people necessarily don't have to die. The problem with that argument is also the inequality that exists in that argument. Why? Because it assumes that terrible people are the only individuals that are necessarily going to exist within the context of this world. But stuff is that also poor people are still going to exist, right? What people also have incentives to rise up in strata. So it means that the idea that you are a rich nigga before you are re-embedded and like continue in life doesn't mean that you're going to like change forever. It's like be rich forever. Rather, it's just like another phase of life where things that ordinarily happen in life can still happen to you. So it means that poor people can still elevate as poor people to meaningful persons in the society. So we think that that equalizer is something that necessarily takes away that level of inequality, the equality that ordinarily would have exist to enable these poor people to even thrive in the first instance, and we think that that's bad. The only way OO can win this motion is to show that even without death or even within death, individuals are, or minority individuals are able to cause change and some level of self-actualization for themselves. What is my extension to today's debate? One is as to human nature. Understand that over the time, human beings have been to like create solutions to problems that necessarily face them. Things like farming, things like or the whole innovation around human beings has been centered on solving problems that necessarily exist within them. So it means that human beings have that inherent desire to conquer. The problem with their world is that they necessarily limit human beings. Why? Because human beings already have an inherent problem. They've solved almost problem that exists in humanhood, but death is the only problem that they are not able to solve. We think that we are justified to hope for this machine, given that it's something that already gives us hope, that we can be able to stifle something that already harms our existence as individuals. Why is this important? One is that it gives relevance to human beings as individuals that necessarily exist as problem solvers in the society to carry out problems that they necessarily want to solve. Secondly, it means that there is more money, like there is more flowing money in the economy, given that there is more human capital in the economy, given that human beings necessarily keep these people to be able to carry out necessary work that will exist with their brain activity in order to continue to protect work. But secondly, you are able to stifle things like dying of culture. A lot of cultures are dying because people of those races have died up to the last that have the knowledge about those races. It means that you are able to solve all this level of problems to the extent where you hope that this time machine exists. But here is the thing. Here is the thing here. Probably CO or IFR might come to fear that, oh, we think that this world that we necessarily have to prove success of this world are like this is a simple response to that. We still think that even if you want to prove, or any matter you want to prove, that this world was successful, we think that we still just fight to hope for this world, given that it's something that we think that necessarily solves the inherent problem that we have, which is still death. But secondly, it means that we as human beings make attempts in order to solve this problem, which is the inherent reasons why we are human beings in the first instance. But understand what great arguments tell you. Great arguments tells you how we are able to, like, aside the whole impact you get, it tells you how we are better able to accommodate more individuals, given that not necessarily not people, like everybody buys into institutions like religion, governments, and all of those type of stuff. So I think that these things like science and technology is better able to accommodate more individuals under one belief that you hope that afterlife exists. Thank you.
Right. This house is uses CPM block yellow.
Nice.
Order imports.
Just oh, you have a timer, that's great. Okay, so I'm guessing I'm audible. I probably will stand. Just listen. Yeah, sure. Just put your hand up. I feel like I'll take it. Put your hand up. I feel like I'll take it. Okay, I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, life has no meaning without decision. You cannot make life make sense without death. They try to argue that death is innate bad, and by extension, it's evil. I'm going to explain why death is the core identity through which we all have to live good lives. The first and certain thing as to why we don't hope this world exists is simple. It's because the most common concept that exists in economics is the standard idea of diminishing marginal utility, which means that the longer you experience something, the benefits you get from experiencing that thing continuously reduces up until the point where it gets to negative utility and then becomes a harm on you. We think the same thing happens with regards to existence. The longer you live within a society, the longer you exist within a society, the less that life becomes worthwhile, the less that life becomes meaningful, the less new experiences you become, the more boring it gets, the more tiresome it gets, the more you really don't want to be alive. And at the point in time where you are continuously coerced to be alive at a certain point, because society expects you to remain alive as a sentient being that exists within that society and can still obviously does not want you to commit suicide, you then live in a world where you are trapped in an unhappy cycle, where you are constantly experiencing the same old things time and time again, and you're not genuinely benefiting from them. You're tired, but you cannot opt out. That's the summary of it, right? But notice why their world is so pernicious. Even if you say that this mechanism does not happen, the more dangerous thing that happens is that societal change doesn't happen. Because let's explain this like this. I die, I get a new body. I don't lose all the wealth I have. I die, I get a new body. I don't lose all the political influence I have. I don't lose the connections I have. I don't lose the strength and power that I have. What that means is that by extension, I am still a hegemon in the society that I exist in. Notice that in status quo, people that are rich do not lose wealth in their lifetime. And when I mean people that are rich, it's not the guy that is a millionaire or upper 1%. The billionaires of the world. There's a reason why the common saying that exists is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Why? Because when you accumulate power, the dilution of that power is very hard. Why? Because the very people very top are a very small amount of people. They oftentimes have networks and connections that incentivize them bailing themselves out in a cyclical manner. So what does this look like? When somebody makes a bad economic policy decision or a bad business decision, they know fully well that the government will bail them out or give them a bumper contract to bail them out. This is how Raytheon has existed this long. Lockheed Martin, even Elon Musk, when he makes bad decisions, knows that he can get a governmental bailout or a governmental contract. This is the same thing banks have been doing for years. They pattern themselves in a way that they know that thanks to those connections, thanks to those structures, they always maintain power. But notice what happens if they always maintain power. If they consistently maintain power, that also means that they have an incentive to ensure the same people maintain power. Because if my guy is still president, if my guy is still the head of the government, my guy is still everybody else, I know he's going to protect my interest. What that means that it forms a class of people that have an incentive to protect their own interests, right? But it's not just a class. A class of people at the very top with the largest amount of guns, the largest amount of money, the largest amount of influence within society. There is no uprising that is happening that's going to transform that. Socialist revolutions are not happening in that world because they are going to create policies, create laws, and use financial backing and even misinformation through media to make you think they are doing what is in your best interest. There is no transformation or change that is happening in that world where that happens. But let me explain even more clearly why this is so dangerous for most people. Is that means that the greater majority of people that live in this world are consistently to keep trying but consistently failing, because that means that you probably are not going to become a billionaire if you rise high enough or you even innovate. At best, you are forced to sell your patent, or something random happens, like governments then seize your patent for scientific purposes, or your patents are being shelled out for military purposes. This already happens in the status quo with innovators. But imagine if there was a fixed hegemon that existed within there and you were undoing competitors. Imagine Netflix was trying to fuck over what they call it, a TV show, like the TV rental system. And at the point in time where they were trying to fuck them over, they were in so deep with the government because they had existed and collaborated with that government for over 100 years that the government would say, you are now a part of this government, you are now a partner, we don't want you to fail, we will intervene on your behalf. Netflix will never win that war because policies will be made to fuck over Netflix. People will literally tell you Netflix just sell. And at the end of the day, you'll be forced to do nothing other than sell. You cannot create change or you cannot create upheaval within that world because the structures just aggressively block you from doing them. Your POI.
In your world where this universe places, this is just expertise implementing things like family life.
Okay, let me explain. Let me explain how we prioritize the average individual in our world. Let's notice why change happens. Change never happens because people in power decide that change should happen. They happen because the people in power die off or change. So the reason why like civil rights movements happened was because JFK got into power, not because the same person was president for 100 years, because he was popular, he never died, and he saved the world from one big war and was super popular. If Thomas Jefferson ran against JFK, he would have probably won. Why? Because everybody knows him. He's on the currency. Everybody loves him. He's written his own story by himself as a hero. If that guy came into power, he probably will not free black people. He probably will not sign in civil rights policies in that world. So that means that realistically, you give somebody 1,000+ years to acquire social capital, you expect people to come up younger. Even if they believe in that world, they are not going to win. But the next more realistic and more painful thing is that you are unlikely to give birth to children if you think you are going to live forever. Because why would I give birth to someone I'm now supposedly obligated to give my money to when I know I can just spend the money on myself for the rest of my life? There's no incentive. The only incentive for having children is a continuation of legacy and a version of human survival. If you have wealth and you're going to live forever, why would you have children? What that means is that you're not getting a new demographic of people. You're getting the same old people having to vote on the same old issues and expecting them to somehow wake up one day and choose to vote a different way. That's not how the world works. You're going to vote the same thing time and time again. The world stays in stasis and incentives are exactly the same, so oppression still exists. A white person in the 1800s would probably not vote for slaves to be free. But guess what? As time moves and things change, new people come into the polling booths and they come and see the world in a different way. They are more likely to vote something different. You trap the world in stagnation in that way. But finally on innovation. And I'm just padding up everything Jake already said, and I think was already perfect. Just doing a little work because I'm bored. The reason why innovation doesn't work is that no matter how brilliant we think Einstein is, he cannot imagine quantum computing because it's too far out of what his current knowledge base is. You cannot expect Descartes to imagine what solar energy looks like. They can theorize, but they cannot innovate up to that point. They are trapped by the limits of their own experiences, and by extension, innovation doesn't exist. Very proud to propose.
Right, this house excuses the yellow. MG.
Sorry. All right. Sorry for the delay. I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The reason why you have the kind of debates that you have in the opening half is because of the failure of the opening government to point out some key things that were mentioned in the info slide that I think would sort of influence how the debates would go. First things first, it does not necessarily coerce, like the info slide does not mention the coercion of people to be brought back to life. It said it can be done, meaning that from common sense, we can say that there exists a possibility for choice of individuals to choose whether they can be brought back or not. That's the first thing. Second thing, right, is that it does not necessarily sort of the info slide mentions that these guys are brought back to life in a new body, right? Just with their lived experiences. What it means is that these guys are may not necessarily be brought back specifically in the geographical locations which they existed before. Abacha could be brought back as an Indian or a fucking native or something. What it looks like is that these guys are brought back, yes, but like only with the sort of like existence of like their minds and their lived experiences to a very large extent. I'll show you how that takes out most of the case, like most of the things that like you get from opposition and like all of that. Now, first things first, right? Our opening says a bunch of things like that will be beating them on. So the first thing they tell you is on things like reduce the level of religious like subjugation that you have in terms of people like sort of like yeah, reduce level of religious subjugation. Yeah, like some dumb shit about like creating some level of clarified curiosity after life. We think that those things are good, but being that we're going to show you some essential things as to why such a word is something that would be hoped for, we think that is like we're basically winning this debate. So first things first, notice panel that some of the problems that you have that are pointed out by opposition are things that are like mutually inclusive. So in both worlds, you're going to probably have bad leadership and probably an unending like bad leadership and all those type of things. But there exist certain problems within society that make it such that life inherently is much more difficult to live. Issues within specific sectors, things like medicine, things like economics, things like governance. That's a particular problem within society. Because within society today, we have problems like coming up with solutions for things like cancer or things like economic solutions or like governance solutions as to how governance can be better within those specific regards. Our what creates the capacity for brilliant minds who have the capacity to provide solutions to some of these problems, to come back with their lived experiences and provide some sort of extension from their lived experiences to provide some of these solutions. So you're not bringing back Albert Einstein in the 19s. You're probably bringing back an Elon Musk who probably is current with the problems within his generation and can provide some more proximate solutions as a capacity of his brilliance and like that possibility. What it means is that in our world, we have much more proximity to the solutions of problems that make it that human life is an impediment to live. So you have an individual that probably was getting to the break of the cure for cancer, and he probably dies, right? He comes back in a new body with his mind and the capacity to finish that work. What it looks like is that individuals within society are much more proximate to cures for cancer and all those type of things. What it means is that the extent to which you have happiness within society is like much more. That's our unique extension. That's why we're winning this debate. If that like problems of governance and other type of things exist within world, we like are much more proximate to a world that is at least livable and at least like better for human existence. I'll take that POI.
Okay, so the problem is after the cures cancer, the entire thing is unexpected. You cannot solve any other things in that world because it's going to be built up. You cannot imagine the problems of 200.
Ayafa, you want to tell me that? Okay, Ayafa, you want to tell me that an individual who was proximate to the problem, like the solution for cancer and all this, you know how much of like how difficult cancer in its inherent existence are provided for humans and they are like and the existence of humans. People have died from cancer. Their lives have been made miserable and all those type of things. We think that as long as that slight chance or possibility for brilliant minds who were much like close to the discovery of solutions to these problems have the capacity to come back and provide those solutions, we think that like that's a word that we're willing to just have, right? But the second thing, and this where like this is something that our opening also like sort of touches on and like doesn't do proper analysis on, right? The idea of the inequality that exists within society, right? Notice that like within society, there's a problem of individuals having limited resources, access to like things that they like would have made it such that lives were better. Things like resources, things like the gift of time that would have made it such that the capacity or possibility to be much more proximate to a self-actualized life is lessened because you're probably rich and don't have, and your life expectancy is what 65 years. That's not enough time to make possible connections that would have made it such that your life would have been better. That's not enough time to probably like sort of at least have the slight chance of having a self-actualized life. At a point where you are like sort of bring back these people specifically like this, what it means is that if anything, you give them that possibility for like, let me take you.
Why is it not difficult to teach your 60 to 70-year-old mom or grandma how to use Instagram, no matter how smart they are?
And that's another thing, like this is a new reality. What it means, like, listen, what it means is that these guys come back within they are like sort of like brought back within society. What it looks like is that they live within these realities and in some way are incentivized to learn about these things, because these are things like that sort of affect their everyday life. Your grandma is probably going to have to be forced to go to an ATM and use the ATM because she's going to go to the market. It means that she has the like possibility or like has that capacity or sort of incentive to learn about it. The possibility for learning about it then gives them that capacity to sort of impute and build on it, because we don't think our grandparents are redundant. We think that at some point, at a point where sort of old age and all those type of things affect their capacity and interest in life to sort of engage those sort of things, you take away that problem where you sort of give them new bodies and all those type of things and a sort of capacity to sort of provide solutions to all those type of things. If you don't get anything in this speech, ask yourself, panel, in what world do people live in like relatively much more like self-actualized like world? That's this world. Proud to propose.
Right, without excuses, the member of government, invite member of opposition.
I'm like, nothing concerning. Really get anything. Anytime, anyhow you want. You like to badger, you badger. Not that you. Or inside the school, you still like something. Okay, thank you. Let me just set up a timer myself. This should be fun. Sorry. Okay, so beginning in 3, 2. Yeah, so beginning in 3, 2, and 1. Let's be honest here. You've had a very beautiful debate so far, especially with the kind of ideas that you get both from our opening and also from the other things that exist within the purview of the room. The problem, however, and this is very critical as to what determines who wins this round ultimately, and please, it's very important to listen to this part, is that at best, the bulk of the cases that you get from opening opposition, at best, they basically talk about how you replicate problems that already exist in status quo. There's the reason why these guys can constantly ask you, do all of these things in themselves not exist in society? Where you talk about inequality, where you talk about things like bad leaders, stuff like that. All of those things are things that are consistently replicated within status quo. So at best, the status quo's problems exist. They don't necessarily show how comes those problems in themselves become worse. It will show you problems generally within the purview of the world becomes worse, such that their world becomes unlivable. It means therefore that you should buy our idea even beyond theirs. But beyond that as well, the only idea you can necessarily think about that necessarily give its own, the whole idea of how progressivism is not necessarily possible. But then if you just use a simple intuition pump, even though you have those individuals there, as long as people are still giving birth to more people, it means that there are more people that are able to fight against the oppression. It means therefore that their world in itself is still hanging on a balance of itself. Our world, however, with the 4 extensions that I give you within the purview of today's debate, and necessarily going to show you how comes that world that they hope for is one that is particularly unlivable. The first extension on how comes to create a permanent war economy. And this is something that is very, very critical and unique in itself. In the universe of the Undying, war ceases to be an exceptional high-cost decision and instead becomes a structurally normalized feature of international relations. In our world, the primary constraint on war is the irreversible loss of human life. States must weigh the political, economic, and life consequences of sending citizens to die. But beyond that, things like public backlash, labor shortages, and long-term demographic damage all act as brakes on sustained conflict. Like basically, the reason why US don't want to go on war and stuff like that is because of, one, you lose citizens that would otherwise have contributed to labor. Two, things like public backlash and stuff like that, and all of those other things in themselves exist. In this world, however, that constraint disappears. Notice that it still plays into their world when they say states can decide who they want to, because overall the states want to necessarily reboot these guys in themselves. States must weigh the politics. So basically, in this world, however, what happens is that constraint disappears. Soldiers who die are simply revived, allowing states to redeploy the same human capital repeatedly without permanent loss. At the same time, notice the incentives that drive war remain entirely intact, or you could even argue that they even exponentially increase. The reason for this is because states would still seek territorial expansion, things like access to resources, things like ideological dominance and geopolitical leverage. All of these things are things that will in and of themselves still exist. If you add that to the fact that they're inherently even adding more people to the population, means that the need to territorially expand even becomes something that increasingly increase within these particular spaces. So the best way these things exist, but the result is that you now have a fundamental imbalance in terms that the benefit of war persists while the cost of war is dramatically reduced. This transforms war into a low-risk, repeatable strategy. Leaders are more willing to initiate conflicts, escalate them quickly, and prolong them indefinitely because the usual consequences no longer apply. Over time, this produces a world in which conflict is not resolved but continuously recycled. Borders are never definitively settled because no side is ever forced into a position of irreversible loss. Regions become permanent theaters of violence where cycles of destruction and rebuilding occur without end. But notice that people like soldiers ultimately do things like experience repeated deployments and repeated deaths, accumulating more psychological, even if their bodies are otherwise restored in and of themselves. Notice then that what you then create within the purview of this world is that civilians
which is other individuals in particular spaces, live in environments where stability is no longer possible because war is no longer something to be avoided, but something that can be endlessly sustained. The reason why this is the most important point in this land is because it operates on the level of systemic harm in and of itself, in the sense that war reshapes every other aspect of life, be it economics, be it governance, be it infrastructure, be it ideological ideas, be it personal safety. What you have in this particular space is a space of perpetual conflict, and that in itself collapses whatever benefits that they might necessarily want to tell you. Notice how it becomes increasingly worse in their world. Diva, make it good. Because soldiers can die. Because soldiers that can die. So what countries in themselves are willing to make all of those particular switch because soldiers can die. But even as they have made those switch, there are certain wars in themselves that still require soldiers to be deployed. It's like talking about US Iran war, they're talking about deploying soldiers. That POI does not necessarily do any damage whatsoever to the case. The next extension then is on how there's a collapse of criminal deterrence. So the test was on a state macroscopic level. This now speaks to a micro level. Do not take my word for it. They tell you on their own side how religion collapses. The problem is that part of the reasons why people in themselves are not like willing to like engage in things like crime is because they believe in the afterlife that they say that like they take away some people. So people no more POI is grace. Relax. So people in themselves do not want to like commit crime because they don't want to go to hell and stuff like that. In their world, they remove that limit from them. But beyond that as well, beyond all of those, you also remove the check mechanism that death has on people in terms of you don't want to commit a crime, like certain crimes, such that you are not necessarily going to be sentenced to like death, or you don't necessarily want to die in the process of taking those particular risks. In the sense that you now fear irreversible consequences. Within their world, you take all of those because things like state enforcement and all of those things in themselves no longer become something that is quite tenable in themselves. What it means is that the incentive for individuals to commit crime becomes one that is increased when the fear for the consequences of crime is taken away, especially since that consequence being the ultimate kind of consequence being death has necessarily been removed. The third thing then is that within their world, you no longer make humans a finite resources. In terms of how comes you now have more and more humans in themselves within these particular spaces. Considering the fact that you still have people in those particular spaces, it means that the ills of capitalism becomes one that is overly increased. Why? Because workers in themselves are no longer finite, their values in themselves are no longer infinite, are no longer finite, rather their value in itself becomes something that drops. What looks like actual work conditions and stuff like that. Why? Because more options exist. Economies basically operate on the basis of demand and supply. When the demand is so much and the supply in necessity remains the way it is, it means that like their lives in themselves become one that is inherently more worse. Notice how all of these cases I talk to speak as to how comes you make status quo increasingly much worse, and how comes all of those things in themselves are tied directly to the fact that they are undying. But lastly is that you remove their agency, or the agency of humans, in terms of the fact that the people that are even making these decisions for these individuals in the vast majority of instances are states or other individuals that do not necessarily know what is proximate to the desire of these individuals. We think that this is a very intrinsic proximate harm, because for something like this, you necessarily shift most of the agency of these individuals away from them, either directly or indirectly, while you necessarily do things like run campaigns that make people more likely to choose this particular means as opposed to any other means on all levels. Closing.
All right, this house excuses the
wicked guy.
I'd like to invite the lovely. Okay.
Yes, we're ready. Okay. I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The info slide stated, when they die, they can be reviewed by a machine on the universe that prints a new body based on stored body scan. Why I needed to state or read this part again because why I needed to read this part again because it totally takes off the whole of closing opposition's case when they come to tell you about how countries will most likely want to go into war because they are not scared that their soldiers will die, their soldiers will come back. this is something that my partner did that is very much important in this debate. He clearly stated that these people's mind is the only thing that is being preserved. They will be printed up in a new body, and never really stated that this body would most likely be in that geographical place. So when you come and tell me that US will not be scared of sending people to war because they know that these soldiers will come back again, it's a total fraud, because that soldier that died will most likely be printed in another country, and it's not going necessarily giving them another military person to send into war again for them to go and die. So their frame or their statement that this thing would reduce the fear of people in terms of bringing out more armies to go for war because they know these people are dying and coming back, it's a total flaw, because he never really stated that these people would be reborn in that geographical place. The second point in which they stated, they talk about how people want to commit certain crimes because they know that even if they die, they're most likely going to come back. Now, this is one point that my partner clearly stated. The most reason in which people would most likely want to do certain things, live a good life, is not necessarily because of they don't have the liberty to commit those crimes. It's because of what? They have incentive of things they want to achieve in life, things they want to get. For instance, now, you're living with a happy family and you know that if you go to commit a certain crime, you will most likely be killed and those your families will not have someone to cater for. That's the incentive for a man to not commit crime. Not necessarily because he thinks that if he go and commit that crime, he will die. It's not necessarily that makes people to even want to commit certain crimes. Now, go back to our case. One very important thing that my partner stated that they fail to understand: the human mind has the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. This is a very popular thing that you need to understand, because when it comes to the aspect of the POI that I have asked about, how do you expect the human mind to know more? Like, for instance, he said that